Hey, how's it going? I'm now, I'm getting sound through here, but I'm not sure that I'm getting you. Do you have him, Joel? Okay, your audio is not coming through. So as you get that sorted out, well, I'm going to run us in here and welcome everybody to Leadership Line of Sight and invite you to interject anytime that your sound starts to function. I'm excited for today's show. I'm actually excited for this week. There's so many interesting things that are taking place around us. And honestly, I think that there's some people out there that just need some context because the world is kind of peddling fear. They're peddling uncertainty, and they're also talking a lot about change. But I think that there's a lot of people that don't really realize that sometimes the pain you're in is worse than the pain of change.
Yeah.
Welcome, Scott Connors. It's always good to see you. How do you feel about the week that was?
It's a difficult week for everybody. I think everybody's tired. I think there's almost this feeling of enough is enough. Whether it's micro in our individual worlds or macro. I was just on the phone with a CEO before this call, and we both decided what the world needs is a good laugh. We need to learn to laugh again a little bit and look past the bad and remember that we're human and that it's human nature and that we just need to find a way to smile and laugh and get back to the basics of our lives.
Man, and more interactions, more connection. Like, I think that some of the way that people feel weird right now is because they didn't realize that their connection to the world outside was somewhat like disrupted during COVID. I remember we were talking to Jesse Crossan a couple of weeks ago, and his connection with society was cut off for 19 years. Yeah. And he talked about how valuable his connections with women were when he was able to write to family members. And also he had a girlfriend from inside prison, and he felt that the prisoners that didn't have those experiences, they were more likely to objectify women. They were more likely to do things that were disassociated. And I found that super interesting. So I think that we should associate more. Like right now, the Edmonton Oilers are in the playoffs, and we're associating a whole bunch up here.
Yeah. Yeah. And you know what else I think we're starting to realize is that it's a fine line. Our infrastructure, our food, our supply chain, our power, our water, our earth. It's a very, very fine line between oh and uh-oh. And as human beings, we're starting to feel a lot more fragile. And I think we need to lean into that fragility and lean into that with each other and go, man, we really have screwed this planet up. Okay, now what can we do? And recognize that there's fine lines in our lives that we're all sharing in. And if we can get behind that with consciousness, collective consciousness, it's going to be some really good, valuable times ahead.
Yeah, and what you're talking about is recovery, and that is a great way to introduce today's guest. So we have Yael Swerdlow, and Yael, you've lived several lives.
Yes, right? I have indeed.
Like Pulitzer Prize-Winning Team member, covering things as a photojournalist during like riots in LA, right?
Yes.
And then you glimpse again, and you're talking to people about trauma and founding Maestro.
Yes.
And this is something that's so innovative, gaming to help people.
Thank you.
I cannot wait to talk to you a little bit about how you're helping people make connections as the CEO and founder of Maestro Games. Welcome to Leadership Line of Sight. My name is Taylor, and I am the marketing strategist at Gravidia. I'm here, as always, with Scott Connors, the Chief Change Officer of Crankset Group. And Yael, we are so happy to welcome you.
Thank you very, very much. I'm super happy to be here. Scott, nice to meet you. Taylor, and you and I spoke for a while on the intro call.
Yeah, it was intense. I have been looking forward to this.
Thank you. Yeah, that's kind of my little bit of a trademark is the intense thing, but I do laugh a lot, to your point, Scott. So,
I think that you have to, right?
Yeah, you do, absolutely.
Like, how does where you came from speak to what you're doing today? Can you tell us a little bit more about Maestro and what your goals are?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, it's definitely an extension of who I am. It's a through line, actually. I believe very strongly that I was put on this planet to make the world a better place. And it's part of actually the part of being Jewish is what's called tikkun olam, which is to heal the world. And so I take that very, very seriously. And because of that, being a photojournalist is all about, as I think Sontag said, photography is just darkness illuminated by little points of light. And I carry that hopefully everywhere I am. And that extends to looking around and seeing the pain humanity is in and creating a technology platform with Maestro that is using the most powerful ancient technology known to humankind, which is music, and then pairing it with a very powerful technology, which is virtual reality, and then gamifying it, and then bringing it to first responders, the folks that are most in need right now. So that's what we're focusing on at this time.
Holy wow.
Thank you.
Like, honestly, I genuinely believe that music is another language. You know,
it absolutely is.
Yeah, my daughters go to a school for musicians, and it puts cello and violin in their lives, and it helps them understand that. And the way that they teach in this Suzuki method is where they learn it by sound first, because they find that that's how we learn speech, like other languages too.
Exactly, and music is the language of the soul, and it's the language of the spirit. And in order to not numb emotion, which is what we're most concerned about with first responders, you have to enable them to be able to feel the things that they might be vulnerable with. Like, so for example, if you're a first responder, and especially this past week, I mean, obviously it's heartbreaking for all first responders and because we're also including, besides healthcare providers and law enforcement and military and firefighters and all of the, first responders you think of, we also include educators in that category. And so when you think about, what the teachers are going through, it's really, really important to understand that the level of trauma that is encoded in their nervous system at this point and calcified needs a place to go. Otherwise, and if you can express sadness, if you can express joy, then you're not fully numbing out. And that's our goal with Maestro, is to provide a safe space to feel the emotions that you might be afraid to feel. You
got to feel them to heal them, right?
Well, yeah. But, again, as a former photojournalist, I mean, I know that, we're not, at Maestro, we're not mindfulness. We're definitely kind of the opposite of that. But I know as a photojournalist that, in order for me to photograph, as I call it, Man's in Humanity World Tour, I had to be numb. And then later on, sometimes weeks later, months later, something really insignificant would just cause this cascade of tears or emotion. And you kind of go, wait, what just happened? And you're like, oh, wait, that's my journalist response time. That's me finally processing out the emotions that I've been holding back. And, with my own PTSD and my own moral injury, and, it's really crucial to be able to clear yourself, if you will, and not wait for something to trigger you off.
Can you take us a little bit into that phrase that you said, moral injury?
I would love to, because it's at this point probably an obsession. And I learned about moral injury from Dr. Noel Lapana, who is one of the most amazing humans I know. He's on my advisory board, actually. He is a former Air Force veteran who served in Afghanistan and went on to get his doctorate in moral injury. And what moral injury is much different than PTSD. PTSD isn't something that happened to you, or something, like, oh, you almost got killed, or you got attacked, or whatever. In moral injury is your wound to the soul. It's the violation of your values. So think in the healthcare space, for example, a lot of what the doctors and nurses and others are suffering from is moral injury. They have the PTSD from having gone through, say, the pandemic and all of the incoming, cases that came in, that they had to incubate, or they had to decide who gets on a ventilator, all those things. But at the end of the day, the moral injury is having to make those decisions, making decisions that maybe the family insisted on, that they knew was it not the best thing to do, that went against like their medical code, if you will, their own personal code. Same thing, like even in, you would think a simple example would be with firefighters, for example, and paramedics. They respond to a traffic accident. They have to decide who to try and save first.
Mm.
You know, so it's a daily occurrence, and for photojournalism, it is a prerequisite of the job, because you literally are required to stand by while you're witnessing horrible things, you know, genocide, famine, you know, all sorts of things, and war. And if you don't understand that the moral injury is the prerequisite to the career, because you're documenting, but you're not allowed to like pick your hands up necessarily and do things. Obviously you do, if it's life-saving, you do get involved, but you're not supposed to. And, you know, so there's a great story illustration out of it, out of the famine, one of the famines out of Sudan. There was a toddler that was crawling after somebody who literally grabbed their bag of food away from them. A man just took the food away. And the photograph is huge because it's showing a toddler who's clearly starving to death, crying and trying to catch this man who just grabbed his bag of food. And the photographer shot it. And you can see by the angle that the photographer was like right there, very, very close. And the photograph ran back then in a magazine, Double Truck, I think in Time or Newsweek. And there was a thing of, well, why didn't he stop him? Why didn't he do that? And the answer is because by getting that photograph and having it be Double Truck in the magazine, it raised awareness, it raised funding, it raised, you know, the consciousness of there's this famine going on and this is the type of things that are happening. So, yeah. But the question, you know, is going to be, what about the photographer, you know? And I think at the end of the day, he did get involved. But closer to this past week, the moral injury of the responders to the Texas shooting is horrific. And they are most definitely going to be in need of lots of healing.
That is a lot. And I like how you're describing PTSD as something that's happened to you.
Correct.
Whereas a moral injury is maybe something that you did because of circumstance, because of situation.
Or something that happened to you. I mean, you know, sexual assault, for example.
Yeah.
That violates your your sacred beliefs, your moral code.
So as someone who is, you have seen almost every step of the spectrum. You've been in the place of the photographer seeing horrific things, but knowing that you had to zoom out. You had to see the bigger picture of getting this to show people, because then you can make it millions strong, right?
Correct. Yes.
And that's something that, and then as you go forward, you've applied this to other places, like what you're taking from some of these hardest, I guess, like hardest places to survive.
In a way, yeah.
To the places that nobody else can see. Like my wife is a trauma nurse.
Oh my God.
So I think that many people see running towards gunfire as something that you kind of have to be broken to do, right? Like outside of the people that we train for that, who does that? Who runs towards gunfire? You know?
I think actually more people than you think.
Really? Okay, I want to know. You've been to these places. Tell me more.
I think there's an inherent heroic nature to humanity, and that we need to tap into it more. But I definitely don't want to go down the rabbit hole of thinking that everybody's a coward or everyone is self-preserving. There's examples of all sorts of folks saving other people's lives that they don't even know. And I hold on to that, frankly, because I think that is more of our inherent nature than not. And I think running towards gunfire, you don't think about it. Your adrenaline kicks in, and you see people at risk, and you want to go save them, especially if they're kids, or the people that you see are vulnerable. And I think it's only, frankly, how corrupted we've been a lot by social media, where we're now more bystanders to everything, where we have and it's not even a bearing witness. It's more of a bystander addiction, if you will. I think that's really our societal problem. I think we have an addiction to just being a bystander as opposed to getting involved.
How we use social media. We tend to look for conflict on social media, but I also think that's an interesting tie to video games.
I think it is.
You're calling to your inner hero, right?
You definitely are doing that. I think it's super important to be able to understand the difference between reality and fantasy, though. I am a firm believer that video games can desensitize you. And I know it's kind of a little bit hypocritical for me to say that, given that I'm in the game industry, but I'm also on the other side of the game industry, where we're seeking to enable folks to heal from being desensitized, if you will. I mean, that's actually more of the mission of Maestro.
So one of the games that many people would know, including myself, would be Activision's True Crime Streets of LA.
Ha ha ha! Thank you.
Right? And you were the scriptwriter for that, and that was coming from your own world experience, having covered the riots in LA.
Well, I was actually brought in to educate up the script. The script was already written, and apparently it wasn't very good. And it was more about because it had a international policy, international relations storyline of the Russian mob, the Chinese triads that led to the North Korean famine. And I have a degree in international relations, and so they were looking at this thing, saying, "Can we please put some substance to this?" Mm-hmm. And so that was why I was brought in to educate it up. But then I did such a good job, they brought me in again to dumb it down. So but it wasn't. I know. I was really upset at that. But
like a child in the elevator that's sitting on the floors, right?
I know. I was reviewed for brilliant dialogue, and so I'm sitting there going, "How many times is a game reviewed for brilliant dialogue?" So I'm okay with that part. But you know what? Fantastic. It was more about. That was the most expensive game at that time. It had the cutting edge technology that we now take for granted. It had licensed the satellite imagery of all 220 square miles of LA. And so you could drive in the game to like the old Tower Records that isn't there anymore. You could drive to a bunch of different landmarks, and, you could do things that were, later on not so good. It had a very expensive soundtrack with Snoop Dogg, and then it had a lot of really famous voiceover people like Michelle Rodriguez and Christopher Walken and a bunch of other folks. So it was a real expensive game. It was a lot of fun to write. But
I loved that, though, as a game experience, when you recognize some of the voices. Like, how can you miss Christopher Walken?
I know. It was fun. It was really, really fun. But the thing about writing a game script actually is that it's doubled the work of a movie, for example, because you have to write two separate scenarios for everything. What if the hero succeeds and what if the hero fails? So even if even in the one-off comments that you hear from the background that no one pays attention to, you have to write two versions of everything. So it's a lot of intense dialogue.
And also the ability to explore all of those things yourself, right? Like, it's interesting to see how a decision tree can pan out, or game theory, essentially, in the games.
It was definitely fun. And, the decision tree, but I had more fun just writing, like, the one-off lines. I think at one point I was spending time in Cape Town when I was writing this. And so I would wake up and I would write it, and then I would email it, and they would get it the next day because of the time difference. So it was really good to be able to do it. But at one point, I think I had to write something like 300 one-off one-liners, and I couldn't put a sentence together afterward. So I was like, "Ugh."
You're out of words.
I was totally out of words, and it wasn't that taxing. It's like, this never happens to James Bond. I mean, that kind of stuff, like one-liners like that.
So from that experience to your experience as a game designer now,
Mm-hmm.
what type of storylines are you taking people through that have been those first responders? Or maybe, I think maybe more people have to look at it like exposure. So when we have things like, when we see things like school shootings,
Mm-hmm.
or see those things firsthand, anybody who is exposed to that at like first degree, second degree, third degree,
Right.
those are potential injuries, right?
Oh yeah. I mean, I think all of us collectively have, we definitely have that sadness for sure, and that anger, and heartbreak. Frankly, I think and it's not just limited to the U.S. I think that these things are such horrific acts that it transcends borders, and folks around the world are reacting to, the suffering that we're all going through right now.
So as somebody who has international relations experience,
Mhm.
how do other countries see the U.S. when things like this happen repeatedly in short order?
You know that poem that says America is a gun?
Hmm.
Yeah, America is a gun. England's tea, I think it's England's tea, France's brie, but America is a gun. That's the end line of every stanza of the poem. And I think they see this as an extension of just the sickness that is raging across the U.S. right now.
And can you take us a little bit further into how you see that sickness?
I see it as a breakdown of understanding that, and this is going to sound a little bit weird, but creativity has two sides. Creativity has a dark and a light. And if you don't harness the creativity of a human being, and you don't allow them to express it, and you don't honor it, and you don't give them healthy, wonderful, uplifting ways to be fully human and to touch into what I call the divine spark, which is creativity, it's going to come out in dark ways. And I think that so much of the mental challenges that we're going through right now in a society, and so much of the pain that we're going through right now, is because we've lost the ability to be spontaneous. We've lost the ability to feel joy. We've lost the ability to be creative. And, one of Maestro's missions is to put music education back in schools, and especially the schools that need it, and to focus much more heavily on what brings people joy than just survival. That's my own personal take on the sickness that we have in society right now. Goes down to what's definitely the social media thing for sure. And of course I'm being a hypocrite because I'm on Facebook and Instagram and all of that. But at the end of the day, and I think the pandemic showed this, and it is that we have to be able to nurture ourselves from within holistically. And we have to be able to find joy and be able to see beauty as a way of healing things that are difficult. And that's where I think we're at, unfortunately, the crossroads going in the other direction. Does that make sense?
Yeah, like I keep following this train, and the train I'm kind of following is that like shallow experiences lead to like almost like that being the environment, right?
Yeah,
And I once heard that hurt people hurt people.
that is true.
And now what I'm wondering is if disconnected people do disconnected things.
I think that that's a really important statement. I agree 100%. And I think that's the problem right now. There's a lack of connection. There's a lack of empathy. I mean, in one sense, I'm appalled that we actually have to use technology, among them mine, to teach empathy. I mean, we have to actually bring humans back using technology and using tools to be able to feel empathy again. When and to me, that says more about the human condition and what needs to change than anything. The fact that we have to actually teach people how to care about one another again.
Scott, you talk a lot about that.
Yeah, I agree. It's a complex issue, and I've had some very meaningful conversations and folks recently about this. What is all of this? If it's all part of something bigger, and you say social media, absolutely a part of it. I think what we're starting to figure out at the organizational behavior level is it's just too much data, too soon. We have so much data that's coming at us consistently throughout the day that brings us to a place of almost data overload. And so emotionally, to use your words, we become numb.
I agree 100%.
We can't show empathy because we're dealing with joy and sorrow and hope and fear and all this emotion. There's just so much data that's coming into our brains, and we're not giving our brains a place to go and take a breath.
Yeah, but I don't think it's the emotions that are coming up at us. I don't think it's like, but I agree with you there a little bit that there's joy and fear and sadness and hope and all the other things that are coming at us. That's and I think that we're numb to the emotions that are coming at us, and that because we're not tuning into them. I have this weird thing where in the midst of photographing awful things, my hallmark, my trademark was that I didn't focus on the horrific stuff. I focused on the connections among the humans that I was around. I focused on, making sure that it was, this is Man's and Humanity World Tour, but it's also the greatest amount of humanity at the same time. So, and, healthcare providers and first responders and aid workers, they're all a part of that world that is very selfless. And I was overseas for International Medical Corps in Somalia and Sudan and Rwanda in 1994. And, the amount of selflessness that folks put to others to just help them survive, like the most horrific genocide that they had gone through, as in the case of Rwanda, was a phenomenal thing to witness, and humbling and beautiful. So in the midst of all of this hell, you do find incredible grace. And that's the thing that I think we have to uplift and celebrate, but we also have to let the folks that are in pain know that they too have that grace inside them, and and hopefully create a safe space for them to express that, because that's the other part of it. There has to be a level of safety to express where all of your ranges of emotion, where you're not going to hurt others and you're not going to hurt yourself.
Yeah, it's so crazy to think that the people that lack safety offer safety.
Exactly. Oh my God, yes. I mean, you witness so much of that when you're assigned to other, parts that are allegedly less than. There's a great movie. One of my favorite movies of all time is Wim Wenders' The End of Violence, and it really does speak to what we think is valuable and what we think is important, and then how we get a wake-up call in one form or another that drops us back to what's really important.
I like that statement. So when you take a look at what's possible with the technology that Maestro Games is developing, right? Mm-hmm. I can hear you to say that you want to take it to the people that have been first responders. How does this actually help them?
Technically, it resets the autonomic nervous system. It secretes dopamine, serotonin, endorphins, and neuroepinephrine. And because you're also fully immersed in gesturing, you're also creating new neural pathways for neuroplasticity. So it's a very, I like to say, subversive technology, because it's music. It's a beautiful environment that our developers actually out of Cape Town, Sea Monster, is a award-winning game and animation house, and we're super blessed, A, that they're family, and B, that they are our development partners. But it's a way of feeling emotion. It's a way of, like we're kind of a running joke that thankfully the headsets are more or less waterproof and you can cry in them, because people do, myself included. It allows you to just decompress. And because you're gesturing, you're focusing on a guide trail, which is a conducting baton. And then there's a lot of gamification in there of, capturing butterflies and making flowers bloom and a lot of other things that we put in there. And, as we build more experiences, the goal is to have 8 to 10 experiences a year, sort of an iTunes library of experiences with different kinds of music and different experiences. You'll be able to choose how you want to feel in a way. Do you want to feel relaxed? Do you want to feel energized? But at the end of the day, you're able to process emotions like sadness, like grief, like fear. And then because you're dropping the secretion of cortisol and you're being taken out of your fight or flight mode, you're naturally coming down from the emotions that are difficult to deal with, and you're more or less going into a state of flow.
That's from the inside out. Like, we see so many therapy methods that are from the outside in, and
Right.
to hear about something that's taking into consideration your chemistry, taking into consideration the fact that your brain has the capacity to change.
Right.
I really like the idea behind just a different approach than what we've seen. Like, I remember talking to my grandmother about her father and what kind of man he was when he came home from the war.
Oh my gosh.
She said he had a really tough time. And what helped him was that he found another man had been through a war, and they would just go and spend time together, right? And maybe it was just, and she said that when they spent time together, it wasn't even necessarily talking about those things.
Right.
Sometimes they just play cards, right?
Yep.
But I think that in the times that no one else was around, once in a while, they'd probably tell each other their vulnerable stuff. Like sometimes when they hear a car start, they lay down on the ground for 40 minutes or something like that, right?
Oh yeah, that's part of the moral injury therapies as well, is to be in community and to just allow the relationship to unfold. That it's not like you have an appointment with a therapist and you're going to sit down and just cognitive behavioral therapy. Community is so much more important when you're dealing with moral injury, and you do have to be able to hang out with folks that were had experiences that are similar to yours. I mean, the running joke in the photojournalism world, and I'm sure it's in the law enforcement and others, is that you can't marry a civilian, because they're not, when you come home and say, honey, I had a really lousy day, and they're going to tell you their day, the two don't coalesce. And there's a tendency to feel that your day was far worse because of whatever tragedy you dealt with. And, it's very, very hard in a lot of ways to maintain relationships that are not fully versed in the emotional journey of a first responder.
Because we see a lot of people that are exhibiting a lot of stress right now. Like, Scott, you had sent us over some stories, and we do some clippings each week. And I know that one of the things that you had sent over was that the tech sector sees the highest job cuts in May since December 2020. So we're seeing a lot of people get jobs cut. I know that, Yael, you're in the tech sector, right. And I want to talk a little bit about what this is and then how people process it. So, Scott, what is this?
Well, this is just the start. We're going to see some more downsizing across all industries. And the reason I sent this over for our listeners and our viewers is here we go with emotions again. I can get any job I want. I mean, I can go anywhere I want. There's so many jobs out there, and everybody's hiring, and it's hiring. And even this great resignation. Oh, there's more jobs because more people resigning to, oh my gosh, now jobs are getting cut. That went from this to this. We just had a seesaw. Whack. emotionally, if you're in the job market or you're thinking about being in the job market, emotionally going, do I stay? Do I go? Well, I can go if I want to, but now can I go? And it's just going to get worse. And it's the end of that economic stimulus along with all the other complexities. And we're in unprecedented economic times right now. And what I mean by that is the supply side models that all economies measure their performance on were never factored in this many layers of complexities. Jamie Dimon, the CEO of JP Morgan, said we're headed towards an economic hurricane. This is the CEO of one of the largest financial institutions in the globe. And then he says, we don't know if it's going to be a short one or a long one or a hard one or not so bad, a category 1 to 5. So even we know we're going into turmoil, and yet people at that level can't even tell us what it's going to look or feel like. Unprecedented times. And so we don't want to overswing our emotions of tech center layoffs. What we want to do is we want to understand where the opportunities are. We don't want to look at all the problems in the labor market. It's time for us to focus on the opportunities in the labor market. And that's why I sent that one over. You're on mute, Taylor. You're on mute, Taylor.
I'm not on mute.
No, I'm on mute. And thanks, Scott. I imagine that you're exposed to this quite a bit because you're in the tech sector, right? And this kind of highlights what you're talking about, where there's people that are going to work each day and they're seeing some people that are losing their lives, like my wife did during the pandemic.
Right.
News is hitting at the same time, and people are reacting to news like this almost in the same way. And it's a real kind of understanding of capacity for those people that are really stressed about these things. Can you talk anything about stress response? Is there a way that people can handle this better so that maybe they're more resilient to injury?
I think that it comes down to self-worth, actually. And I think that, one of the parts that came out of the pandemic, and I think part of the Great Resignation, is people saying, kind of waking up to the fact that they are not their job identity, right? That they're not there. I'm not the, coder. I'm not this, I'm not that, because there was such a tendency to place your value on what you do for a living. And I think part of the pandemic kind of ripped the shreds off of that. I mean, ripped the covers off of that. People are less likely to define themselves now by what they do for a paycheck. But I also think that, as I was listening to a great podcast the other day, Brene Brown's podcast, they were talking about, people want jobs that have purpose, that have meaning. And other people are like, screw your job and purpose, and I need to put food on the table. So there's the contrast of both of those things. I would say that the best way to be able to deal with that is you've got to grab your purpose and meaning where you find it. I mean, you've got to, because this life is so incredibly uncertain, especially economically right now, that if your entire identity is based on, what you do for a living, that's out of balance. And, and again, I'm being a complete hypocrite here. So just, do as I say, not as I do. But I think that it's really important to find the balance. And I think more than anything, the pandemic and the Great Resignation and all the upheaval in the market showed us that. But I also really think that there is what's coming, I think, economically, that Jamie was referring to, is people are going to wake up to the fact that they are being sold a bill of goods, literally, buy this, it'll make you happy. Do this, it'll make you happy. And I think that the economic downturn, if you will, is going to be where people sit there and realize how little they actually need. And that's going to shake up the economy in ways that are, worrisome. It's like, no, I really don't need that super expensive watch. I really don't need that, hot car. I really don't need, that wardrobe full of Armani or whatever. And it's going to be not that there's anything wrong with that if you can do it, but I think that there is most definitely going to be a focus more on what's precious, not what's important, but what's precious. And that is time with people that you love, solitude, being able to be by yourself and take a walk. You know, I mean, people are going to realize that they would not give up the things that have become precious and sacred to them for the goal of, you know, upscaling. And I think that's what's coming. And
Yeah.
I think, and
Yeah,
I hope so. I really do. I mean, I hope so.
Yeah. And I'll tell you this, the way I explain it, because I'm saying a lot of the same things, is I say we're going from a world based on worth, what we're worth, or what I want people to perceive I'm worth, hence the luxury brand names, right, in the closet. And I too can be hypocritical. But we have this mindset of worth, and I'm worth more than you, and my house is bigger than you, my car, my wardrobe. And now we're moving to a society of value. What's valuable to me may not be valuable to you, but what's valuable to me is time with my family, and the car's not as important as it used to be.
But I think that the next extension of that, and I'm hopeful about this, I think the next extension of finding that value of what's important to you is going to include community, is going to include giving back, is going to include making the world a better place, no matter what that looks like for you. It could be volunteering, it could be, you know, reading to kids, it could be anything. But I think that is the next, hopefully the next step, where we're going to realize that the actual value and purpose of being here on you know, on this planet is not to accumulate, but to the opposite of that.
That's right.
And I, you know, and again, we all have, I mean, I could be a hypocrite here as well, just in terms of, like, you know, certain items that I do have, but at the end of the day, it is, what are you doing? What are you going to leave behind? What's your legacy? And, you know, do you want your legacy to be that you had a mansion, or do you want the legacy to be that you set up, you know, dinners and, I mean, lunches for school kids? I mean, and the two can coexist. That's the thing. We, and should, in a way, we've been taught that it's either one or the other. It's not. It's, you can do both. And it's just a question of how you want to live your life that way. What do you want to do?
Yeah. And I think we're going to get to a place also on the hope scale there of, it no longer matters who's right. It matters what's right.
I agree with you there.
And
yeah.
Finding the way to what's right is our next challenge, I think, in society. To your point about community, couldn't agree more. We've been preaching it for years. At my company, we actually wrote a book over a decade ago, Why Making Money is Killing Your Business. And that you should go to work to make meaning, and that meaning makes money, and it's about that community involvement and those kind of things. And so I think we're there. I think we're there at a necessity. I think we're there at a circumstance. I think we're there at a black swan event. But I think we're at that place. And you said it when I was listening before. All those things in Sudan and Rwanda that you saw, those moments of grace that weren't captured on film, that you did see, that you did witness. We're going to see hopefully more and more moments of grace in our daily data dump or download versus those moments of tragedy and tragic circumstance.
Well, I think but here's the thing. Okay, I did capture it on film, one thing, because that's my secret sauce, actually, as a photojournalist. But the other part of it is we have to train ourselves to see it, because it is all around us. And we're so trained to notice the tragedy, and we're so trained to post the car wreck that we just drove by. We're so trained to see the tragedies and the pain that we're not training ourselves at all to notice the moments of grace. The moments of grace are all around us.
Yeah,
we have to notice it and celebrate it. That's one thing. But
and we have to acknowledge it. We have to actually take the time, the moments when we see it, to go, that's awesome.
Exactly. Or just take it in and secretly smile, right? And no. But the other part of it is, I almost agree with you on us being there. I think we're almost there. I think that we have a ways to go. because I think that we're still in that, I guess you'd call it withdrawal in a way from the way that we've been taught to be in the past couple of decades. And we need to now move into that, the compassion, the empathy, the noticing of grace, and all of those other things. But I think we're almost there.
Yeah. Well, I would suggest that we have a longer way to go than almost, in some ways. In one of those ways is empathy. We have got to learn to be. You say the word empathy to a crowd full of people, and most of them really have no idea what you're asking, what you're saying. What does that even mean? How do I show empathy?
So okay. I wanted to, going back to your point earlier, about, so I just left, I was at a conference in Columbus, Ohio, the past couple of days. It was a healthcare innovation and capital market conference, and it was very, very good. Excellent conference. And a lot of the conversations focused on private equity. And there were a lot of private equity folks that were there. So we are now sitting on a surplus of $2.3 trillion in private equity. There's more, it's called dry powder. There's more dry powder available now than in the history of money. And they're all, sitting on it. And not to disparage any of the people that I met, but sitting on it isn't making anything better. And they all are looking for ways to deploy it. But at the same time, and their job is to look for safe ways to deploy it, right? Where there's already a lot of other things going on to make sure that they're deploying this funding is not going to get, is not going to go down the drain. But there was another, so that's one point. Hold that there. I read a fantastic op-ed, and they talked about like the investments in like NFTs and crypto and all this other stuff. And the author of the piece brought out that if you really wanted to invest in things that were super solid and important, you invest in things that are always going to be needed. So, for example, baby formula. Invest in the supply chain shortages, and that way you're combining your purpose with your work, with your ability to make the world better, and all of that. It was one of those really excellent things where they talked about there's so many other things to invest in other than stuff, and I think there's so many more ways to bring value than stuff that people can brag they own. And I think, David Cronenberg apparently did an NFT of his kidney stone and sold it. And I'm like, okay, that's the ultimate example of what's wrong, in my view. All right. I mean, I'm going to say really?
Yeah.
Someone actually bought that as opposed to like funding, the baby formula stuff or sending money to Ukraine, or, I mean, really?
It really, when you take a look at that example in the current times that we're in, it maybe shows that disconnection.
Oh, 100%.
I know in the last generation, they talked a lot about the golden rule. Treat others as you would like to be treated.
100%.
And now that lacks empathy. And the reason that it does is because you have to get to know them well enough to help them the way they would want to be treated.
Mm-hmm.
You need to get into their shoes. Like I remember when there was a food shortage somewhere in the Middle East, and I was as a child, and we decided that they needed food, and a good way to send food would be to send starch. That would be something that would be important to them because it was agriculturally related, and it was a famine. So we dropped potatoes from planes, not knowing that no one on the ground had ever seen a potato before, would know how to prepare a potato, how to make it into food, basically.
I'll throw one more at you. So when I was in Southern Sudan, I went on a food drop with the Belgian Air Force out of the Operation Lifeline Sudan headquarters in Camp Lokochoke, which is the northwest tip of Kenya. And so they're dropping 200, tons of lentils, literally manna from the sky, except for one thing. The NGOs were essentially, this was in between famines. And so the NGO were creating dependency. So if you're dropping food from the sky, you don't go out to harvest your crops. If you don't go out to harvest your crops, then the next time that a, famine comes around and the food drops aren't happening, you starve to death. And so, I think it was during Eisenhower's administration, they said, how do we create dependency from the rest of the world so they'll politically do what we want them to do? And the idea is you control their food supply. And, so a lot of international aid was based on the political need to divide the world, if you will. And it's how much money are you giving? How much food are you giving? How much infrastructure are you able to pave the roads? I mean, one of the reasons the genocide in Rwanda was so efficient, if you will, was because they had brand new paved roads. So, it's all about the infrastructure. But if you want people to be dependent, countries to be dependent upon you, you control their food supply. And that's what was going on in the 50s and the 60s and the 70s and the 80s. And to an extent in the 90s as well.
Well, Scott, you had sent over some more news that Israeli groups had entered an Al-Aqsa mosque compound. What did you see here?
Yeah, this is the kind of behavior. And by the way, Yael, I too am Jewish, was raised in an Orthodox family. And this is the kind of stuff that just starts to really bother me when we cross lines, and when we think that one is better than other and one part of humanity is better than another. And then we dig a little deeper in, is this the real news? Is this fake news? You look at this one photo and this one headline, and you just think of the Jewish people and their traditions, and you say, that's just not who we are. Then you ask yourself the question, but wait, are we? And do we really act this way? And are we really acting this way? And why are we acting this way when this is the way we've told them not to act towards us? And here we are going into their sacred mosques. And so I see I see conflict. I see talk of resolution, and I never see any resolution and more conflict. And we're setting examples like this when we do things like this, to your point before, that cascade and reverberate through the world and create more apathy and create less of that migration towards hope, right? And those catalysts for changing for the better. So instead of storming a mosque, how about we ask ourselves to be invited in and have a conversation? That was very disheartening to me. And I like to share some of the disheartening stuff so that we can learn more and lean more towards what's right versus who's right.
Well, I used to be the press officer at the Israeli consulate in LA, right in 2004, 2005, and it was right before disengagement out of Gaza, and I got poached to do a master's in public diplomacy over at USC, and so I did that, and I think this is probably the most painful part of it, because those of us that work in Israeli understanding and peace building and advocacy, it's like the worst addiction ever. You just can't walk away from it because you're like, no, we're going to have another conversation and we'll make headway with my colleagues that, we've so many of us have done the master's program, and so many of us have worked at the consulate, and we're just, trying to wean ourselves off of that. But it's definitely true that it is a infuriating situation, but it lacks the political will to be solved on a lot of different sides. I mean, there's the normalization of relations with the UAE and others, and potential really full normalizations with Saudi Arabia and other Arab countries. what the political will has to come from the entire region, and that's the thing, decades and decades and decades ago, there was an opportunity, many opportunities to be able to say, Israel's here, we're not going anywhere. Let's build up the Palestinians and give them their own state and live side by side and have the economic and cultural and political interactions and religious interactions. And that, back before the I think it was the early 80s, before a lot of things went horribly wrong, families that lived near Gaza could go to Gaza and buy from the merchants there and everything. So it was a completely different environment. Political opportunism being what it is, on all sides, it's been used to drive wedges as opposed to create community, and that's the issue. If the Arab countries would have just gone to their populations and said, we're going to deal with them, with the Israelis, as best as we can. We're going to figure this out because we don't want everybody to be living in a constant state of war and fear and poverty and all the other things. So get rid of the idea that you're going to get the entire state of Israel back. Like Yasser Arafat used to have a patch of Palestine on his fatigues, and it literally was the entire state of Israel. And so they're like, no, that's not going to happen. So let's figure out a solution that is workable. But instead, it was he was exploited, and he exploited the situation. So they wouldn't have to put sewers in. They wouldn't have to do any of the things to build up an actual functioning state. And instead funnel money just to stoke the anger to keep the status quo, or to make the status quo worse. And that's the part that's so damn hard to rectify, because you're sitting there thinking, there were so many chances, and there's been chances on both sides too. I mean, the purpose of, like the occupation is corrosive. It infuriates me. There is so much wrong here. But at the end of the day, you've got to be able to overcome so much. And it's so much easier to send your troops in on both sides. It's so much easier to lob a bomb from, Gaza to Sderot than it is to actually sit down and say, wow, there are families that are there. Let's figure out a way for our kids to play together. So my wonderful 98-year-old completely badass mom is amazing. And so she is like, okay, I'm staying alive to make sure, and I taught her how to swear, but I'm not going to do it here. But she's like, I'm staying alive to vote that out of office, meaning Trump. And then I'm staying alive to vote no on the California recall. And then I'm staying alive to vote in the midterms. And, then I'm staying alive for the Israeli-Palestinian peace process. It's like, yo, mom, you're going to live forever.
Yeah.
So.
And for great reasons. Right?
She's
staying alive for us, like she's staying alive for other people.
Oh, absolutely.
There's some other people that are in that phase of their life, and it seems like they want to order for the table and then leave the restaurant.
No, my mom is amazing, and she literally, we, before I left for this road trip, because the California primary is on June 8th, I think. We voted before I left, voted by mail. And so, that's her thing. Thank God, right?
So when you look forward, when you look at this next phase, what we're expecting is turbulence, right? Like, Scott, when you take a look at what you see in the next 6 months, what do you see?
I see a period of absolute rifle shot focus. And what I mean by that is everybody needs to be very focused on whatever it is they're doing and how they're doing it, and what they're going to define as success, and what's the ideal outcome 6 months from now. Do we need to be right where we are? Do we need to cut costs? Do we need to raise prices? Do we need to lower prices? How do we compete in an uncertain world? What makes us most competitive, and what makes us good at what we do, whether it's the gaming industry, whether it's the health and healing industry. I think it's going to take intense focus for us to get through the next 6 months. And I think it's incumbent upon business leaders and human beings to focus on what's right and what's real. What can we really accomplish given all the uncertainty, and to set very, what I call 3-foot world goals. We can only see 3 feet in front of us. Let's set 3-foot goals.
And so when you take a look at your perspective, Yael, what do you see in the next 6 months?
Wow, is that short term or long term? I see a continuing reckoning, actually, and hopefully the political will to really understand that the personal is political, that we are most definitely in a geopolitical situation, if you will, that we have to understand much deeper from all sides. And I think that the next 6 months are going to be, well, they're going to fly by in a nanosecond. I know that. I'm hopeful that this new wave of Omicron 2.2 point something is not going to force another lockdown or force more tragedy. But I see just a tremendous amount of uncertainty, and unfortunately a lot more of the same. I don't want to be a downer, because I'm normally not, but I'm definitely worried for the next 6 months, because I think people are going to start feeling the scarcity, and that's going to play into fear, and obviously the political opportunities that brings for the demagogues to come out. I think that's what we're going to see. I think we're going to see a hell of a lot of demagoguery. And it's going to take everything that we have as humans that are fighting against the demagoguery to fight back against it. That is my big, because don't forget, we're coming up towards the declarations for the 2024, and that is going to be a what show.
Yeah.
I think this is the longest I've gone without swearing. I think I deserve an award.
I know, but I got to tell you, there's no holding back here. We are not you could choose to censor yourself, but I sure the hell am not going to.
Okay. Well, I think it's going to be an absolute shit show.
I agree. I think that this is going to be turbulence, right? Mm-hmm. And but that's how most people are going to see it is I'm not sure which way's up. I'm not sure which way is in alignment with my goals. That movement where we were all going to resign, and now this movement where companies are not necessarily going to invite us back is going to shake the job market. I think affordability is going to cause a lot of turbulence.
Oh, 100%.
Those companies in the highest cost locations have to right now hire from their drive pool, their commuter pool, and they have to offer wages associated with that. And now the affordability has been thrown way out of whack by how real estate consumed all of our attention and resources from entertainment and travel during the pandemic. Yep. So these types of movements are going to offer pathways. They're going to offer pathways for the people that are open to opportunity. But there's going to be so many people that aren't ready to see and play into the movement. They're not doing those OODA loops, those like observe, then orient yourself before you decide and act. Because they see headlines like what we displayed today, and it's observe and act, like a reaction.
It's all a reaction, and I think that's part of it, but that's how we're being wired right now, that you have to react as opposed to actually think things out. And, moments of pause are crucial in making decisions, and we don't do that anymore. We react to things and we get triggered. I am hopeful that this election, the primaries and the 2022 election, is going to be absolutely the most brilliant wake-up call for folks that don't care about others. And I'm hopeful that, that the folks that are funding things like the gun lobby and everything else, I'm hoping that this is just the wake-up call that they need to understand that they are not in power anymore. Do I think it's going to happen? I don't know. I don't know. We have such a, lack of focus where a nanosecond is a long time for our attention span at this point.
Honest to goodness, the NRA votes. All you have to do is join and outvote them.
I know.
There's just not that many members. They used to have a different purpose before what they've done now.
It's a level of
participation that makes change.
Participation makes change, but also, frankly, you've got to vote. I mean, if my 98-year-old mom is staying alive to make sure that, God willing, even though we don't live in Kentucky, that Mitch McConnell gets thrown out of office because she wants to make sure that, if that is, if she can literally, stay alive to make sure that she does her civic duty, then, the 20-something can do that too. And other folks apathy is not okay anymore. You can't say my vote doesn't count. You can't say that if I, donate $1, it doesn't matter. Yes, it does. The butterfly effect is even more alive and well now than ever before.
And the ability to be disruptive. Like, look what they did to the stock market when they chose a way to be disruptive and picked a good target, right?
Yeah.
And this can be done to politics, right? Outcompete those people for their power. There's so many things that we can do on the outside, but also hedge your bets. We want to make sure that people are making safe choices, and make sure that you look around the chessboard before you take your fingers off the piece.
I think so. But at the same time, being cautious sometimes leads to inaction. And so it's sometimes more important to just pick your cause and go. Pick your action and go.
Well, I like the action that you picked.
Thank you very much.
I have to say to think about someone who is a champion of mental health among those people that have experienced PTSD or have experienced moral injury. I really like that you're the one. I like that you're the one who's bringing change from a science level to the outside. And I invite everybody to take a look at your company and also find out more. I love what you shared with us today.
Thank you. I very much enjoyed it. And Scott, it's lovely to meet you as well. Shabbat Shalom and Hag Sameach. And, so today is that weird alignment where it's my Hebrew birthday and my English birthday. It's both.
Yeah.
And so when you have your Hebrew birthday, you're able to offer blessings that have more power. So I am going to bless the both of you and the entire audience, and by extension, that all of us should obviously have robust, great health with no challenges till 120 years, as we say. And that we should all realize that we are infinitely capable beings to make the world a better place and act upon it.
Well said. And after we get all that into your heads, vote.
Yeah, and vote. Exactly.
Vote.
Exactly.
Just vote.
Please. And I'm going to expand on that. Vote with your votes, but also vote with your dollars.
And vote with your
things that mean something to you.
Exactly. And also vote with your feet.
Yeah. I love it. Well, we've been here with Yael Swerdlow. She is the CEO and founder of Maestro Games. She's joined us from San Francisco. She's traveling around to help people. And you can find her on social media. She's on LinkedIn. My name is Taylor, and I'm the marketing strategist of Gravidia. And I'm here with Scott Connors, the chief change officer of Crankset Group, who's helping people in leadership make those changes and navigate in our uncertain times. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today, and I hope the rest of your day is remarkable.
Thank you, guys, very, very much. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you.
Take care.
Yael, and that blessing felt very warm. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Absolutely. You guys all take good care, and I look forward to speaking with you. So